Now let's put the kirti on the next wall here. We're going to show you a couple of different options on how to do this. We're going to show you a butt seam and a lap seam, which we haven't done on the other wall yet. Brian, I just noticed a couple of things. One, it looks like you're going to roll this kirti out horizontally, and you've given yourself a couple of lines there to go by based on, it looks like, the width of the kirti. Is there any particular reason why you're going to do it that way?
Well, a lot of times if it's a first-time user, maybe they're not familiar using thinset and a trowel, we'll recommend that they run it horizontally, because then they're not spreading as much thinset as we did on this big wall. You can see I had a lot of area to cover, and I had to get that thing up where it was still wet, get the kirti on.
Okay.
This makes it a little bit easier for people who are maybe doing kirti for the first time or have never worked with these trowels before.
So they're not trying to cover as much area with the thinset initially.
Right. It's going to be easier for them.
Okay.
So it's a good way to show that there's a couple options, more than a couple options, but it's really a preference, you know, if you want to run it this way or run it horizontally.
There's no particular requirement with Schluter systems in regards to which way the kirti is going to run.
Right.
Okay, so the same process as before. We're going to get the thinset out of the bucket and on the wall. And once we get a lot of thinset on the wall, then Brian's going to start actually spreading it and getting it keyed in. Again, you can see over here there's a pencil line giving us a general idea of where the tile is going to stop. We'll stop the kirti just a little short of where the tile is going to go by just maybe a fraction of an inch back, so it isn't exposed out past the tile. And again, the same process that Bryant explained a little earlier, burning it in or keying it in. This is going to make certain that you have full contact of your trowel with the surface, and we're going to get a better bond that way. Also, if you remember, it's going to give the surface just a little drink, so that when you go to actually spread the thinset on there, it's going to be in that nice loose state that we say is such an important factor of making certain that this is an easy process to go through. If you mix the thinset up too stiff, you're going to find you're working way too hard to get the kirti on the wall, get out all the air and bubbles from underneath, and be able to move any excess thinset that you may have underneath the kirti. Well, now he's got plenty of thinset on the walls. He's ready to go there. Sort of placing it again, kind of getting it in position. You want to have a general idea of where it's going to go, how it's going to fit on. This is going to allow you to get the stuff in place before you get it too firmly embedded in the thinset. So do this step first and know that you've got it pretty much in place. Now that you have that, then you can start working on the kirti, getting out all the air and blisters out from underneath it.
And just like working with wallpaper, I'm starting from the center and work out to the edges.
You can see that this is a pretty simple process here. You're not fighting it a whole lot, Bryant, I can tell. Doesn't seem like you're using much pressure?
No, just a nice even pressure. I'm not pushing it too hard. Just really getting it to lay in there nice and flat. Okay. That's the main objective, because you want a nice flat surface, as close to being flat as possible for your tile work.
Okay, so now that's that piece. What we want to show you next is how you treat an adjacent panel, another section of kirti. So in this case here, what we want to show you is a butt seam. Now, there might be an instance where you would prefer to do that type of seaming instead of a lap seam like what is generally practiced here. Any particular reason, Bryant, why we would do a butt seam over a lap seam?
Well, the kirti band, the 5-inch kirti band that we're going to use here is thinner than the regular kirti. So if we do an overlap with the regular kirti, it's going to be a little bit thicker than if we just use the kirti band.
Okay, so it's going to be thinner overall once we have it all tied in and waterproofed. Now we'll position this piece again, like the last one. And this does not have that overlap, remember. This is actually going to be the butt seam. And the reason being, as Bryant mentioned, is that when you have this material butted together and we use the kirti band to do the seaming, it's going to be thinner than if we did an overlap. Would that actually be a substantial amount of overlap that would ever really matter to us, Bryant, when we go to set the tile on there?
Well, it depends on the size tile we may be installing. Some of the thinner mosaics, it might show up. So by using the band, it will make a difference as far as how thick we're going to be at these seams.
Okay, so the thinner mosaics don't require such a big notch trowel to set on the wall, right?
Right.
Where if we used a large tile, you would typically use a bigger notch trowel, and an overlap of the kirti is always thinner than the thickness of our bond coat we use to bond the tile to the kirti.
Right.
There's a
so
good
you can see how I was chasing that.
Yeah,
that air bubble.
That was a great example of getting out that blister or that air bubble out of there. We do want to get those out. What if I'm setting, say, a 12 by 12 on this, Brian, and I have, when I come back the next day, I notice a blister on there that's maybe just about this big or so? Is that going to really be a problem with, say, a larger tile on the walls?
Not really. Larger format tiles, like you said, you're using a bigger trowel, so you get more thinset. Smaller tiles, you may want to cut that out and replace it with a new piece of kirti that that you're going to make sure is real flat.
Okay.
But that's pretty much all there is to it. Just making sure, and you can see even after I've done it, I'm still chasing a few spots, and that's no problem.
Okay, this is our final piece of kirti to put on the walls in this 2-wall shower. Again, the same process as before. We got the thinset spot onto the wall, and now Bryant's burning it in. Again, we've got a pencil line there showing us roughly where the tile is going to end. The tile is probably going to go a little bit higher than that pencil line. That line was actually there to show us where to put the kirti. So now that we've got the thinset on the wall, now we're going to go ahead and gauge how much we're going to leave using the notch side of the trowel. you can see even with this very small notch trowel that it's more than enough thinset to do this. The key to this process is to get the thinset loose enough that it can flow underneath the kirti so that we can make certain that the kirti is solidly embedded into the thinset that's spread on the wall. Now in this case, we've just shown you down here a little lower, we've shown you a butt seam where we actually have a little gap between the two, but we're not going to worry about that because we're going to use a 5-inch wide band, and we require about a 2-inch overlap. So with a 5-inch band here, even though we have a gap, we're still going to meet our requirements of a 2-inch overlap of the kirti. So now we're going to come back up here. You see we spread down a couple of inches down onto the original piece of kirti, and now it's laid up. So we're doing this in small sections, one, because it could be more manageable for you to lay up smaller pieces of kirti, but two, because we wanted to show you both a butt seam and a lap seam. It seems to me that the lap seams are what are used most of the time out in the field. It's a most efficient way. It's going to be very quick. You already treat all the lap or all the seams of the material by lapping them over, and you're ready to go. And as we mentioned earlier, most of the tile you install is a fairly large format, so the lapping of two pieces of kirti here really never comes into play because that lap seam of the kirti is always thinner than the bond coat thickness that you're going to use when you actually install the tile here. If we use a tile that was bigger than a 6x6, we're going to go to at least a 1/4x1/4 notch trowel, and a 12x12 or larger is going to go to a 1/4x3/8 notch trowel. So that's a substantial amount of thinset on the wall. So once we get the tile installed over that thing, you'll never see the lap seam. This is a very quick way to do it. So that's why we've shown you both a lap seam here, and then down here we have a butt seam.